The Maritime Silk Road in many ways, like much of the BRI, can mean what you want it to mean. But broadly, in terms of fishery resources, what we're looking at is providing a secure supply for the growing demand for seafood within China. Distant water fishing is one of those things, people often call it deep water fishing by mistake, but distant water fishing is essentially fishing that takes place a long way from your territorial waters, so that often thousands of kilometres away. Why it's significant in China is initially they didn't really have a distant water fishing fleet. They were very much concentrating on their own resources, but the pressure on those got so great that developing a distant water fishing industry was really inevitable in many ways if they weren't to rely upon other countries to meet their seafood needs. A big part of why their distant seawater fishing has burgeoned is this provision of subsidies, because to send a boat to basically the other side of the Pacific Ocean, as far as Ecuador and places like this, you need a lot of diesel fuel. And unless you subsidize this activity, it's not really profitable. And China has been under pressure through the WTO to get rid of these subsidies, but they found kind of sneaky backdoor ways to make them continue. And thus you see mass fishing in places like Ecuador that, if you look at the price of fuel now, you wonder how on earth are they continuing to do that. This question of whether Chinese fishing operators are interested in engaging in sustainable fishing activities is a really interesting one. I think at higher levels of government, they realise the importance of not being singled out as, at the moment, China is the worst nation on earth, just ahead of Taiwan, for illegal, unregulated fishing. And they don't like that for their global brand. The difficulty is they still want the fish. So how do you balance these competing needs of national image and the burgeoning demand for seafood within China's borders without consumers having to pay too much for it? So they haven't really managed to resolve that tension. And the other thing which is pressing upon them is these industries provide jobs, and they provide, if you like, a real important source of revenue for provincial governments. So it's basically just 3 seaboard provinces that are largely engaged in distant water fishing, and they have invested huge amounts in support facilities for this activity to continue. And so once you've put those, millions, in some cases billions of dollars into developing these facilities to support it, you can't then walk away easily. The key to China and the Pacific getting more sustainable practices happening in the Pacific region is, one, the Pacific actors working together to present a fairly united voice. And this is something the Pacific has actually been quite successful in, particularly in one agreement I'd mentioned called the Parties to the Nauru Agreement, which has really helped a lot of quite small nations with huge exclusive economic zones work together to ensure that operators are paying fees, are paying licensing fees, and are, if you like, paying a fair price for the fish they're extracting. The difficulty on the Chinese side is simply the demand, and beyond the damage to China's reputation, there's not a lot in it for them to put observers on boats and enforce sustainable fishing. And in that, it's a very tough life. If you're an observer on a boat making sure that a Chinese fishing fleet or Chinese fishing boat is doing the right thing, you're thousands of miles from home by yourself checking up on whether they're engaging in shark finning. Are you really going to pick up the phone and risk your life? Probably not. So the way things are tilted at the moment, it's a really hard ask to make Chinese fishing more sustainable. I didn't expect it to be so dark, or it to have tales of the wrong sort of ingenuity, like this ability of Chinese fishing fleets to go dark, if you like, so engage in activities by turning off their equipment and things like that, even changing the size of the vessel in their official log register to mask who was engaging in fishing at what time. So yeah, it's a bit of a bleak read, and I apologise for that.